Hello, and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin with the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Januszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how you doing this week?
Doing great. How about you, Eric?
Doing fantastic.
Hard to
We're
believe springtime. We're staring Easter in the face, and it's light out later on, and so on and so forth. So
yeah,
great.
time's just zipping past.
So, but we have a special guest today who I've met through doing something called networking. I don't know if you and I have ever talked about that before, but we have a fascinating guest who helps out young mothers and young families and so on and so forth. And it's really, really neat to have Madison Fournier here. So it's absolute pleasure.
Madison, welcome.
Thank you.
And Madison is known as the Mama Coach. And why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about that and how you got started?
So, yes, I am the mama coach. I'm first and foremost a registered nurse and a mom and a wife. And what I do is I help new parents and expecting parents navigate some of the more challenging issues that may come up from prenatal all the way up to 3, 4, 5 years old. I do that on a one-on-one setting mostly. I do provide some general education through the libraries and anyone who may want to host me for a general session. But I got my start because as a nurse and mother of two, one is 2 and one is 3, I realized there's a significant gap in care once the baby arrives. So you have a ton of appointments prenatal. And then as soon as baby comes, you spend a day or two in the hospital and then you get sent home. And I myself, as a nurse, had a ton of questions. Is this normal? What do I do if this happens? And having my kids in the middle of COVID, I had lost a significant support group or ability to go out and mingle with other moms. So I started this because I have the background as a nurse. Like, let's provide some evidence-based practice rather than searching on YouTube, right, at 2 a.m., which is never a good idea. Is this normal for my baby? So that's what I do. I help new moms and parents kind of figure things out from the medical side. And if I can't answer the question, I've got a pretty good resource network right now that I can refer out to if it's above my scope of practice.
Yeah, when I ran into you, you talked about this at the networking meeting. I'm saying, wow, yeah, there's so much need for this, and it's so great that you're doing this. And this is actually something where you mentioned the team of other people that are out there. This is actually a formatted thing that you're into right now, which is really, really great the way that that's running. When you talked a little bit about the business structure and whatever, and how you have a whole lot of autonomy and really help each other out a lot. So talk a little bit about how this whole thing came together and the structure of the Mama Coach.
Sure. So the Mama Coach was originated in Alberta, Canada, by a nurse by the name of Carrie Bruno. She's developed this system after noticing the same gap in care in Canada that I and many other women, that have had kids know. We just kind of have allowed it to happen, and our idea, or Carrie's idea, was this doesn't need to be this way. Moms don't need to struggle with all these questions. We have the resources. Let's bring it to mom in an individualized way. So she started this company, and now there are mama coaches worldwide, all over Europe, all over Canada, the US, and we just started in Australia and New Zealand recently. That being said, we're not franchised, which is amazing because I can create content for what I see my community needs. And other mama coaches can do the same thing. So, for example, I am big in the IVF community. Both my kids were born by IVF. So I've got a lot of expertise there. I can help with that kind of stuff. A mama coach down in Philly has a ton of expertise in cleft palates. So if I come across a family that needs some extra support there, I can always reach out. It's a good network of registered nurses that are all mama coaches that we can share resources in that way.
Fantastic. So, what are some of the common questions that you've had so far?
That's a good one. A lot of it is I focus a lot on sleep. That being said, I'm not a sleep trainer. And cry it out means a lot of things to a lot of different people. So I have a lot of people ask me first, like, are you a big proponent of cry it out? And I have to dig in a little bit deeper because that means something very different to a lot of different people. I say if it's not a problem for you, it's not a problem. But sleep is essential. So if you're having trouble, like, we try to navigate that in the best and healthiest way possible. Will my child ever be potty trained? Will they ever sleep through the night? Will they ever sleep in their own bed? Are common questions that I do get. And those are the things that, depending upon what the goals of the family are, we can work with all of those things.
Yeah, those questions do come up. I remember being told when I was potty training my oldest, a friend's mom said, just don't worry about it. They're not going to go to their bar mitzvah in diapers.
It's true. It's true. That's what I tell a lot of parents, they're not going to make it to kindergarten, struggling to be potty trained. Well, we're going to get there.
Yeah, I love your, basically, you go to the website and you have your services there and you have the newborn. I love your title there, the fourth trimester. And
yes.
I said, okay, first of all, it's great that I actually got this, but it's really, really cool. So welcome to parenthood, talking about the new chapter of your life and so on. And again, I mean, there's so many questions that young parents have. I would imagine that you deal a lot with first-time parents, but do they ever come back when they have a second or a third?
They do. And in fact, that's pretty common because if anyone who has more than one kid knows, the second one never looks like the first one. They never do anything that the first one did. They always do things the exact opposite, my children included. So it's like parenting all over again. You got to go back through all of the things and relearn your parenting style. That's something I don't think many of us were told when we became parents. Is number one's going to be one way. Number two is going to be the total opposite.
Yeah, I mean, me having two grandchildren, granddaughter and grandson, they are different in so many ways too. But it's a fun ride as a grandparent because you can kind of walk away when they start having problems.
It's true.
So,
yeah, I've spoken with a number of doctors, and they've all said pretty much the same thing, that one of the greatest assets and one of the worst elements is a parent having access to the internet, because there is so much bad information out there, and people will diagnose themselves, diagnose their kids. What are some of the misconceptions that you've had to correct?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, the one that really bothers me a lot is my potty training parents who see on YouTube or Pinterest or something that you can potty train your child in the span of 3 days. There are a few kids that works on, very few kids. But on the grand scheme of things, it's not realistic. Kids are very fast learners, but something that complex is something that it takes a lot of time and patience. So that's probably the biggest one.
Yeah, people don't really think about the complexities involved in this. I mean, a child has to learn, first of all, when his or her body needs to go to the potty. They need to learn where to go. They need to learn what motions they need to go through. So it's not this simple thing that we all take for granted.
Oh, absolutely not. And I think because it happens so early in our physical development, our knowledge of how we learned something like this complex, it's not in our brain. So the two systems physiologically develop at different times. And so often one is better, or the child is doing really good, one or the other. first, and then parents immediately expect, well, because you know peed on the potty and you're doing good with that, you should be able to poop on the potty. And really, like, those two things are separate systems and they develop separately in the brain, and the sensations are different. So getting parents to understand that. And then nighttime wakings and wettings are completely normal, and to the age of like 5. Honestly, like, that is such a complex brain connection, that it's I think a little bit absurd to, if I can say that, to expect the child to be completely continent at, before kindergarten.
Yeah, and I mean, as you mentioned, if you have 2 children, they're going to be different. And when you're going through potty training, some kids are really motivated and they probably want to do it, and other kids are just comfortable. It doesn't matter if they're sitting in a wet diaper or whatever, and so on and so forth. So obviously, as they grow up, they learn this, and they're learning this right now, that when they put their mind to something, when they want to do something, that's when they're going to work harder at it. And I imagine you run into this a lot too. And you just counsel parents that say that it's going to happen, and some point in time they're going to get tired of sitting in wet stuff or whatever, and their time will come. You can't just say, I'm going to wave a wand and it's going to be now.
It's so true. And, that's why I think the way that I work with families is, initially I'll get a call or consult email saying, hey, I'm interested in talking to you about this going on in my life. For example, we're talking about potty training. And then we set up a phone call or a Zoom, and I'll talk with the parents. I'm now starting to go back into homes now that COVID is getting, fingers crossed, a little bit better. Just to meet the family, understand the dynamic, understand the child. I really think that's so important to developing a plan of care going forward and a plan of action to meet the family's goals. And then, after we have that meeting, I sit down, I dig into my resources, and try to match as best we can a plan going forward, to meet those goals. And we try to get that done in about 4 weeks of time. So in that 4-week span, well, from the initial contact to the end of our goals is usually about 6 weeks. But from the time the start of the plan to the end, we usually spend about 4 weeks together, and they have unlimited contact to me. They can, we set up either email, text, Google Sheet or something, however the family feels good. But I think that initial contact, and really seeing and understanding that family dynamic and the child's dynamic is so important to setting up a good plan of care, because, it's not cookie cutter. Every child is different and every family is different.
We've talked a lot about taking care of the child, but in the case of the parents, having a child, especially a first child, completely changes your life. Do you help them cope with their new reality as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's such an amazing shift, right? From expecting the baby to having the baby. And then there's kind of a moment of, wow, like, I have this amazing little human. And a lot of parents lose themselves in that. And that is 110% acceptable. But navigating the needs of mom postpartum or a new adoptive family, how do we handle these kinds of night wakings and crying? I absolutely, especially my newborn and adoptive packages, like, help parents kind of understand what's going on, help them learn how to navigate these new triggers and new inputs. And I say triggers not in a negative way, but like, there's just a lot of new input, from an emotional side, from, relationship side with your partner, from the baby. There's just so much going on. So I help them try to navigate that as gently as possible.
Yeah. And you also work prenatal. You have prenatal education programs tailored to them. And I imagine that you are telling them that this will happen to you once you have your baby ahead of time, so that it's not as big of a surprise.
Yeah, I try to give them as much of a heads up as possible, but until you're there, sometimes it just doesn't click.
Yeah.
My prenatal education it's a little different than like your typical labor and delivery prenatal class that you would get. What I talk a lot about is the newborn, the baby. When the baby gets here, what's it going to look like? What are the schedules going to look like? What are the feeds going to look like? What does lactation look like? What do all these pieces that for me, I had a ton of questions on and really didn't know who to turn to, because I didn't have my own doctor's appointment for 6 weeks, and the pediatrician is so busy. You might be able to sneak in 1 or 2 questions, depending on how the visit goes when you go for your well checks. But, so I made that prenatal education more geared towards like mom and parents and understanding what's going to happen once the baby gets there.
Yeah, I remember there was a sitcom called Mad About You, starring Paul Reiser and Helen Hunt. And there was one scene when she was pregnant and she's saying, well, why do I have to be the one to do all this? And he says, because you're the mama. And she goes, I'm the mama. Yes, I'm the mama. Yes. And then she suddenly goes, oh my God, I'm the mama.
Yeah.
When my wife gave birth to our first child, she told me in the hospital that night after she gave birth and after I had gone home, she had that moment that, oh my God, I'm the mama.
Yep. I think a lot of parents have that. Like I remember having that with my first, and I was like, it was one of those, yeah, I think it was later in the day after, things are processing in your brain and you're like looking around like, whoa, that I made that, 1, and 2, it's really cool, and 3, I have no idea what to do with it.
Yes.
Whoops, got to go change the diaper. Here we go.
Well, and it's in that moment, you're like, I don't even know what to do with the diaper. How do I give it a bath? Thankfully the nurses in the, postpartum floor are very good with that.
Now, I actually remember when my oldest son, who will be 41 in May, was born, and we were in the hospital. First of all, it was really funny going to the Lamaze classes beforehand. We walked in and it was just a lobby. It wasn't even a room with chairs and stuff like it was just a lobby. And the men are just walking in there and all the women are walking in there like this and stuff like that. with the bumps and so on. It was so cool when all of a sudden, 1 or 2 of them were dropping out. But it was just an amazing time. And so it was great stuff. But yeah, once you get home and coming into what's going on, it's just an unbelievable time. Things are so totally different now than they were then because there's so much education out there, the internet and all this other kind of stuff. I mean, when my oldest son, our firstborn, was home, he was screaming his head off in our room, and the second night I picked up the whole bassinet and put him in the room next door. Oh, they'd throw me in jail if I did that right now. But I said we'd hear him a mile away. So it's just amazing what's going on. And then another thing that you work on is the feeding and watching my son. I mean, basically I was lucky enough so that I went to work and my wife stayed home with our oldest sons until they went to school. So I wasn't home during the day. But watching and my youngest son, even though he works and so on and so forth, handling the feeding type of thing and what your moms have to do as far as, pumping and all this other kind of stuff. And, I got my grandson has got lactose intolerance and so on and so forth. So, I mean, there's all kinds of issues that come on the feeding thing. And then, what we used to have the jars of baby food. And now as far as working them into solids and so on and so forth, I think is a little later than we did and all that. But you coach people through that also. And I imagine that's a major anxiety with parents.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, everybody feeds differently. So, and is comfortable with different things. So the new, lactating mom, we navigate everything from, oversupplies and undersupplies to actual true medical issues in terms of, developing a mastitis. If something's going wrong, clogged ducts, I help moms kind of navigate all of those things. And, we talk to their provider too. If I notice something early, I, immediately say, hey, can I have the number, or do you want to call the doc? And just let them know what's going on. You've got a registered nurse assessing this, and we may want to get ahead of it if these, few interventions don't work. And then the pumping schedule is difficult as well. And formula feeding isn't much easier because you're still getting up in the middle of the night. So I have a lot of parents that like to do formula only, and they'll pump until their supply goes down, because that's what they choose to do. And so I help them learn how to wean quicker than maybe other families might feel comfortable. But it's all based on what the parents need, and that's part of that newborn package. Or parents, moms can just call me up and say, hey, I want to spend like 2 weeks with you, I'm having issues lactate with my breast milk supply, and I want to see what we can do to increase it, or wean off wherever they're at in their journey. But yeah, it's very complex. And then moms going back to work too, I work with them, how do if the breastfeeding mom wants to keep going when they go back to work, because moms have to go back so early. We're not as fortunate as, your wife, most of us, we've got to go back. And, how do we keep that up? That's super important to moms. So the pumping comes into play big time there.
Yeah, and you also have to be able to adapt to the child themselves, because you don't think about it, but they've got their own ideas about what they want to be doing. I remember with my oldest, the nurse telling us we had to swaddle him in the blanket to keep him warm. It was very, very important. And she would come in and she would wrap him up in the blanket, and she would walk out and he would push the blanket off. He just did not want it. And every child has their own thing. My second child, when he got onto eating baby food, he would eat vegetables fine, but he wouldn't eat fruits. It was
That's a new one. Yeah, most kids don't like the veggies.
Yeah, there's always something, and you kind of do have to take your lead from the child.
As much as is safe and as possible. And in those situations, if they don't like the fruit, that's okay. We can, supplement in other ways. Or, if they don't like the swaddle, we've got the arms up swaddles now that are awesome, because my kids did the same thing. My first loved being swaddled, hated being held. He just wanted to be swaddled and put down. And then my daughter always was hands up. So she was the second we'd swaddle her, she'd wiggle her hands out and she'd have them above her head. So, every child is different. And yeah, that's the fun thing about parenting, is you really are pushed to just kind of ride it out in some cases, let it go. But
yeah, I mean, for most of these things, the key is don't panic. We'll figure this out.
We'll figure this out. Yes. But it's very easy to panic, the emotions and the hormones of mom in 4th trimester are running high, the sleep deprivation. So that's what I'm here for, is to bounce those questions off of. Is it okay that my child, puts their hands up in the air when they're swaddled? Or is it okay that they, would rather eat vegetables than fruit? That seems a little more common sense, but there's tons of things that moms are worried about, parents are worried about. And that's why I think it's so important to just provide that, access to me at all times, because they could be calling the pediatrician's office, but they're probably going to be waiting on hold for a long time, especially right now with a bunch of sickness going around. So when I set that precedent with families, you can, text me as long as it's not 2 a.m. I'm not getting up at 2 a.m. anymore, but I will answer you first thing in the morning when I see it. So that's just really important to me, that I'm that support for families.
Excellent. And if this didn't take up enough of your time, I have been informed that you are also a fencer.
Yes, I do that for fun.
How did you get into fencing?
It's a relatively new thing for me. I wanted a sport that I could do individually, because I'm honestly not much of a team sports person. And I wanted something that was interesting. I'm not really a runner, and I've come across this sport, and I said, wow, that's a beautiful sport. And what a way to take some aggression out on somebody, right? Not that I have that, but that looks fun, and I don't know anyone that does it. So I hit up a local club Actually, it's Enfield Fencing Club. I'll plug them right here. And I said, hey, I'm like 35 and kind of, sort of in shape. Like, could I do this or is it too late? And not knowing anything about the sport. And they're like, oh my God, we would love to have you. Anybody can start at any time. And so I went and I fell in love immediately. So yeah, I just started a new weapon, which is a saber, and qualified for nationals like right away. So I was like, "Whoo, all right." That's how I spend my free time these days.
Yeah, you've done pretty well doing it too, correct?
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Very cool. So we are coming up on the end of our time. So if anybody would like to get a hold of you and use your services, how can they find out more?
Oh, that's a great question. So I'm always available at my email, madison.fournier, Fournier, at themamacoach.com. I'm also on Instagram at themamacoach.madison, or you can text me at 860-422-5579. Just let me know, hey, I'm interested in any of your services, and we'll set up a time to meet.
Fantastic. So, Chip, what do you think is the big takeaway for our listeners this week?
Yeah, as I said, first of all, I was blown away by the fact that there is such a profession as what you are doing, Madison. It's great providing the education and being there. I kind of look at you as being a comforting companion for new moms and new families. And it's just fantastic. So I highly recommend that you check that out. And as you mentioned, there's mama coaches all over the place. And for those of you people out there who maybe are not in need yourself, spread the word, because everybody out there has to know somebody who's new parents. And so it's just been a pleasure having you on here, and just keep on doing what you're doing and enjoying.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored.
Yeah, we're so glad you could be on the podcast. And I think for me, the big takeaway is that people need to realize that, yes, this is a brand new experience that they're going through. It's not exactly the same as anybody else's. And the best idea is not to panic and just take things as they come. And it's great that you're a resource there for new parents to learn about how they can deal with the new challenges.
I agree. I go by especially with like breastfeeding and new moms, just because it's natural doesn't mean it's easy. And it's okay to ask for support. You are in a very sensitive time. Ask for the support that you need. It's here.
Absolutely. It's important to remember that you are not going through this alone. You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch every episode at xvadio.com/podcasts, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Audible, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. We'll see you then.